Good morning. Hello, whoever, wherever, whenever you are. Thank you for showing up. Yeah, I'm going to rant on quilting stuff for a little while and get all my sister quilters mad at me, but you got to think about this, ladies. Really, you got to start thinking about this. I just clicked away halfway through a video of somebody, the opinionated quilter. Okay, I don't want to rant on her because she's reflecting something that I want to rant on everybody about. Why does everybody think they should be going out and spending like $40 and sometimes more for approximately a yard's worth of fabric that would cost maybe $10 or $11 if they just bought a yard? I'm talking about jelly rolls. Okay, the jelly roll is the width of the fabric, which we can assume is usually about 44 inches. You get 42 jelly rolls in a roll in most cases. I mean, it varies. There's no rule, but that seems to be what they go as. They're about 2.5 inches wide. So that's 21 strips that are 5 inches wide. How many times do you put 5 into a yard? 5 into 36, 7 times. Okay, so you got a couple of yards worth of fabric there. But you're spending more money, and yes, it's convenient, and you get the variety of colors. I'm not against jelly rolls, but let's be honest, okay? We're lazy. We're lazy, and we don't want to plan. Because if you want to develop a collection of patterns, and you don't have a lot of money, and you buy them 1 yard at a time, you end up with a collection of color, a collection of patterns. I'm speaking about the fabric prints, a collection of prints and colors. And so if you budget, you buy so much yard a month, or whatever your pay scale is. Every time you get a paycheck, you buy your groceries, pay your bills, and hit the fabric store, right? Yeah, you do that. You do. Well, again, I'm not against jelly rolls and pre-cuts. I'm just saying, let's be realistic. It's expensive. Unnecessary expense. It's a convenience. Now, the thrift stores are beginning to push back on us because they're raising their prices to the point where you may as well buy brand new. So the only reason that somebody like me continues to purchase from thrift is because of the ideological side of not wanting to produce more new material. The world is full of all the material we already need. But it takes planning to enjoy what we already have. So, and there's this other thing. People think the world's going crazy because people are greedy. I don't think greed is the actual, what we Catholics would call the cardinal sin that's bringing us all down. I don't think it's greed. I think it's sloth. We don't hear that word sloth too much. You mostly only hear it from, a Catholic nun in the old days yelling at the fat kid who didn't get up to go out to recess as quick as the others. No. I think sloth is what we're talking about here, though. Sloth is laziness. We're lazy. And it doesn't take a lot of work to cut a yard of fabric into jelly roll strips. If you want to have the strips because it's easy to sew a quilt on that method of sew a bunch of strips together, then, cut them up and sew them into 4 patches or whatever, that's fine. It doesn't take much to do it. But then you say, yeah, but I can't go out and buy, if the 42 has 2 strips of each design in the print collection, okay, that's 20 different prints by a particular designer whose work you like. That's true. That's a lot. But if you plan your purchases out so that you buy 2 yards a month or whatever from that designer, by the end of the year, you've got a good collection. Now you say, well, wait a minute, I don't want to wait till the end of the year. I want this quilt for next week. How much of that is a need? I mean, we make quilts for birthdays and seasonal things and holidays. They're predictable. And it sounds boring to say that you should be planning, like knowing that over the next couple of years you're going to have so many kids turning, having teenage birthdays where they want a quilt to, maybe they're going to go away to college or something, they want a quilt for that. Another one is a little baby, maybe headed for its 5th birthday, it wants a quilt with its favorite cartoon characters. You can look ahead for these things. And instead of treating stashes as piles of scraps that need to be sewn into patterns of scrappy quilts, if you plan it, then the stash is the supply from which you're going to do your planned designs. I don't know really why I'm ranting. I think the fact that this lady was telling people about wasting money on and patterns that waste fabric and using patterns that are drawn up. I mean, she was right in everything she was saying. Absolutely right. But it reflects something I see all across the quilting community, that is a dumbing down, turning us all into little consumers. We're not consumers. Get that name, consumer, that label. People think of it. That's disgusting. That turns you into a pig at the trough. Okay? Seriously. That is a word that I remember when it was introduced, and it was introduced by a cult. The cult of Ralph Nader. Yes, he was a good guy who did a lot for the idea that they had to have safety standards on products, because we had problems with cars blowing up because they were putting substandard gas tanks in them. You remember the Ford Pinto? I actually drove a Pinto at one point. I survived. But that was a noble cause. But like most of these problems, it starts out with a noble cause, but then gets exaggerated. And before long, the government was promoting the propaganda, the market was promoting the propaganda, that we are all consumers, we're not producers. And isn't that interesting? Because that went alongside shoving everything out to China and other places where we could not pay attention to the fact that they were using slaves. We pride ourselves on being a free society, but we support slavery as long as it's not in my backyard. NIMBY slaves. NIMBY slavery is what we promoted. And we went along with it. And now, a few of us, a very tiny little few of us, are aware that there are people living on islands in the middle of the Pacific, untouched by all our problems, but yet They can't even walk on their own beaches because of the waves of plastic junk and filth that are washing up in the water from ocean pollution, from all the cheap stuff we throw away instead of living in a terrarium. We really need to live in a kind of like a terrarium where we're conscious of what we use. We do not consume. We use things. And we produce things. And if we're aware that we need to produce what we use, then we don't support slavery. And we don't choke our planet with cheap crap. And and when we plan things, if you have to plan the fabrics you're going to use to make things, you're going to become more conscious of the colors and qualities of that fabric. And the end result is a much happier and better society. But it all comes down to sloth, to laziness, and to being, just allowing ourselves to be dumbed down. Even the idea that you need to use a pattern to make a quilt. Ladies, quilts are traditionally not based on pattern planning. You know, making a pattern and then figuring out how to cut the fabric to fit that. That is very, very modern. That is not traditional quilting. Traditional quilting was a process, which we're beginning to get back into, ironically enough, by using things like jelly rolls, because the strip quilting that's process-driven. Oh, the process is you sew a bunch of strips together, and then you cut them in different ways and reassemble them so that you get little different ways that stripes go. Or, you know, you turn them into 9 patches or whatever. But you're using process, and we know this. When we work with traditional quilt patterns, the 9 patch that becomes an Irish chain, for example, it was simply a process that, as you build forward, you end up with a certain type of design. And then after, you know, people are making it, they enjoy, the girls over in that village over there, they look at this beautiful design they came up with. And it's sort of evolved. And then someone else says, well, if you put another square in tilted, then you get the Irish chain with the little square on point in the middle of parts of it. You know, and these things became part of a community growing. And we enjoy it when we talk about the history of quilts, like when ladies pull out a collection of Civil War era quilts and they talk about the different ways that they fit into messages that were kind of, you know, the double wedding ring is the message of weddings, things like that. And we act like we can't still do that. We act like that's like something that you need to get out of a book. But ladies, I think the reason many of us older folks are drawn to quilting, and look around, that's who we are. We're all pretty much gray heads in the quilting clubs, which is good. It's appropriate. It's what we're supposed to be doing. That making blankets, making things that wrap and warm is part of human life. And we can't be so lazy that we think it's all about consuming. And we don't need all these plastic gadgets. And look at how many of the quilt channels really are just sales channels. I mean, I enjoy the hangout channels, the chat room channels, the various quilting community activity things. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use that phrase. I meant community activity. Like this one here. This comes from the everyday sewist. She's doing 9-patch a day. And I'm actually catching up. I started a few days ago, but if we're going to be doing by the year, I need to have 13 9-patches done today to catch up. So I'm on, what have I got here? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm halfway caught up. I'm making 2 9-patches a day until I'm caught up to the 1 a day. It's a process. At the end of the year, I'm going to have 10 quilts out of 10 twin size, because I make them pretty big. You know, I'm going to have a box of 9 patches and rearrange them. And that's what they used to do. They used to have a collection of the fabrics. Fabrics didn't get, you know, shirts and blouses and sheets and things didn't get thrown. That was never treated as trash. When I was a kid, we actually had a guy, I remember him. I remember looking out the window, and I was small enough that I had to get up on a chair to reach the windowsill. Because I heard somebody going, rags, rags, like that, and I'm like, what is that? And I looked out, and it was a man in an old truck. And he was driving very slowly up the street with his window open, and he was calling that out. And I asked my mom, what's going on? She said, that's the rag man. And she actually turned around and she went and got a bag of old shirts and things that she had set aside. And she went out and handed it to the guy. He tossed it in the back of the truck. That's what he was doing. He was collecting rags. And then I said, why is he collecting rags? And she explained that they turn it into yarn, and they make rag yarn. And we used to see this gray, multicolored gray yarn that was kind of rough to the touch. But in those days, all of those fabrics were woolen or cotton. You didn't have polyesters and all this other stuff. So he had no problem taking all that stuff, throwing it, washing it, putting it through a carding machine, you know, the combers that comb the fibers out, and re-spinning it into recycled yarn. Now we buy recycled yarn. Some of the companies realize we want to return to that. And we live in a more organized industrial level society, so we can't exactly have an old guy driving around with an open truck yelling rags. People aren't going to really understand what's going on. But we can have a company that somehow or other gets the recycled material. I'm not sure how they get it. Maybe that's why the thrift stores are becoming expensive, because the stuff is going to these companies that are making recycled yarn, which then, you know, is it really what we need? You know, we really need to think about what's going on here. And we need to scale it all back down so that we are turning our homes into these self-contained systems, from home to village to community. The wider community has to be more self-contained in terms of the recycling going on within it. I know that it sounds like a lot, but I'm getting a little bit turned off from the consumer mentality of the crafters world. And we really don't need to be doing it. We don't need like plastic containers to hold the wax for the thread. You can just have a little cube of wax in your fingers and run your thread through it. You know, we don't need all this garbage. But somebody's got to sell it, I guess. Oh well, that's my rant for today. I'm going to go back to trying to catch up with the 9-patch plan. I've got my 9-patch, my system now. I got to do my 2 9-patches a day, or till 1 9-patch a day. Work on my Victorian embroidery, trying to get one of those done. I got two more to do on that quilt, and then it's ready to assemble. So I got that. What was the other one I'm working on? Oh, Alice's Wonderland. I'm doing that. So that's 3 projects to work a little bit on each day. And I need to return to that. So I got the rant out of my system. Have fun. Denise Mento, over and out.